Welcome everyone to our second session today, where we have the honor of having Yann Boutang, who was trained in France and Brazil, and who pursued studies in the humanities, philosophy, Japanese, sociology, demography, and economics, present for us today. He will present on the political economy of AI. He is an alumnus of the École Normale Supérieure, Rue de l'Homme, Philosophy, 1970 to 76. He earned a master's degree in philosophy from the University of Paris, a master's degree in sociology from the University of Paris, and a master's degree in applied economics, demography, from the Institut d'études politiques. He obtained the agrégation in social sciences in 1980 and completed a PhD in the origin of wage labor and modern slavery in 1997, and earned the agrégation des universités in economic sciences in 1998. He has served as a lecturer at the École Normale Supérieure and served as an assistant professor at the Institut d'études politiques de Paris, also as a professor at the Université de Bretagne Sud in Vilém, and also as a professor of economics at the Université des Technologies de Compiègne. He was also an associate professor at the Plateforme École Offshore of the École Nationale Supérieure of Art and Design de Nancy in Shanghai, in partnership with the Shanghai Institute of Visual Arts. He also was an invited professor at the École Nationale Supérieure of Architecture in Paris, and also is an emeritus professor of economics at the Alliance Sorbonne Université in Compiègne, France, as well as being an associate professor at the Sino-European College of Technology in Shanghai. So please welcome Yann Moulier Boutang.
Thank you, dear. I wanted to express my, to express my thanks for being invited here, sharing with all the people very interesting thing during a lot of day, which is not usually the case. Usually you have a 1 day, 1.5 day, and that's all. Here we have time. We're in a wonderful place. Warren is an old friend from a long time, and I was very pleased to hear his comments and suggestions. You will see that I'm more or less, we are going in the same direction. So I will start to explain a bit political economy of AI, because I'm not sure it's that much clear. And I will also try to end with a sort of some elements for a guide use. You probably understand, and we all understand, that when we're speaking with art already confronted in literature, painting, drawing, making films with AI, it's not a problem of, it's not an academic problem, it's an existential problem. And as Warren pointed out, we're going to have that. And Tariq said yesterday, we are after the rise of, we're not commenting the rise of something like artificial intelligence. We are now in the middle of it, and now we must understand and propose things for artists, for a young student to manage it for the better. I will introduce, and after retrace artificial intelligence that has already a huge evolution. I will say a word about colonization of the brains, plural. And I will sketch IA as a new product of the new capitalism, cognitive capitalism, and draw attention on a big change for economists, because I want to do the political economy of IA. It's we economists were very keen at reflecting on input-output models. If you think to Philippe Aghion, he has this word input-output model. You have an input, you have an output, and you see that it has increased between. Oh, gee, what a problem. It was already the question of in technology. You used to say, well, productivity is a problem, you see. Where is productivity? Is it due to the people? Is it due to capital? And is it due to techniques or technology? I will try to explain to you what we are really changing models, because the old input-output models of production is really of no use. It should be destroyed rapidly, and we should use a pollination model instead of cropping honey or cropping anything in the countryside, in the factories, and see that things that are most interesting for economists are happening in a very complicated thing, which is called pollination. I will say some word about catching complexity through complexity to preserve biodiversity and survival of life, which is exactly transferring the things Warren had spoken of previously, that is the need of an ecology model in mind. And maybe I will say, what about art in this mess, or what can we say about the use or misuse of model of AI in this thing. So, is artificial intelligence a scientific research program? That's just a technological scaffold for digital multinational? A transhumanist ideology like Raymond Kurzweil, originally American, taken up in France without much nuance by Laurent Alexandre, or simply an industrial and productive reality that is already effective? It's even harder to make sense of, because the chimera of a machine partially replacing the human brain has gone through 3 different stages in the 75 years past. First, the age of symbolic intelligence, inherited from Leibniz, calculated everything mathematically. Next, the age of so-called connectionism, AI neural networks and black boxes that allows decision to be made in a complex universe after raising machines that learn without being able to isolate the function and adjust the parameters that control them. And now the one of generative AI, capable of answering human question with response articulated in human model. And finally, the global project of a general artificial intelligence exposed by Yann, able to overcome the wrong path of the generative AI, as he said, represents that generative AI represent, and its hope for world models. 3 days ago in the Figaro, 17 June, he exposed clearly, it's very clear generally, exposed what he wants is to apply AI to the real physical world. Before, AI has dealt with something complicated and complex, language and so on. But he says languages, symbols, language is nothing if compared to the smallest piece of reality and of decision in the real world. That's what I wanted to do now with my own company. The expression intelligent machine appears in Turing as early as 1941. In the formulation of his test, Turing replaced a fundamental question. Is a machine capable of thinking? With a practical one, can a machine act in the same way as human does, indistinguishably? The ability to think is not so longer defined a priori, but through an experimental setup. Turing test was improved by the Vinograd schema challenge. It starts with having the machine solve a very simple question at the heart of human natural language. To whom or what does a simple pronoun refer in a sentence? If the machine can answer this correctly, it can be considered as intelligent. Terry Vinograd, who gave his name to this intelligent test, gives the following example. The city services deny protesters the right to march in the street because they fear or defend violence. It is clear that the pronoun they refer to two very different things. For a human, when reading it, there is hardly any ambiguity. The first answer is a correct one. For a machine, which considers all logical possibility, is it completely wrong? Depending on whether the pronoun they refer to those who allow or don't allow the protest, or to those who are making the request to demonstrate, it chooses the term fear or defend. We are faced with a prediction of the future that highlights the understandable nature of every language. Because at first glance, either the authority denied permission to protest because they anticipate the violence that will come from the protester, or the protester fear another kind of violence, that of the police, not to mention the combination of the two self-fulfilling scenarios. The authority deploy a large number of police because they fear oncoming violence, and the protester, exasperated by the number of officers, start to turn violent themselves. We are not dealing here with the Aristotelian logic of the principle of contradiction, either white or black, paired with the principle of the excluded middle. There is no third option. But with the Stoic logic of the included middle, which could only be modeled by fuzzy mathematics. On fuzzy mathematics and their fundamental role in symbolic artificial intelligence, and now probably in the development in the Chinese part of the world, The most enlightening reference is the work of Ziad Zalila, and that of his spin-off in Intelitech. In other words, everyday language, which describes complex situations, is used by the human mind and especially embraces ambiguity, which ultimately speaks more clearly than the binary algorithm of even the most advanced generative AI. Binary logic works when you want to point out to a precise boundary, like whether or not something belongs to a set. But it falls short when it comes to sketching outlines, overlapping eras that only the ambiguity of language can suggest to whoever is reading or listening. The difficulty and paradoxes of translation are the best illustration of this. And you know that translators are confronted with the problem of AI and the LLM model language. Most successful thing has been translation, which makes it a tool for every one of us, incredible. That is, you can translate your own thinking in whatever language almost immediately, and provide you are able to check the thing, you immediately can have your thoughts in English, in Shakespeare slangs, or in Dante slang, or in whatever it is. A well-known example, UN Resolution 242, following the Six-Day War in June 1967, within the frame of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Its French version talks about des territoires occupés, where des can be interpreted as a contraction of de les, of the occupied territory, implying Israel must return all occupied territories. This interpretation is therefore that of the Arab countries. The English translation, on the other hand, generically talks about occupied territories, which is not the same as the occupied territories, which means, which is not the same as the occupied territory, all the occupied territories. In the English resolution, Israel is thus invited to withdraw from certain occupied territory, but not from all, as in the French text. Without this double language, there would not have been an agreement on this UN resolution. That is how ambiguity can preserve peace or end war. I'm sure that we will discover in next American-Iranian agreement subtlety of Iranian language and of Shakespeare slang. You will discover, and don't forget the French, always there, that have the right to see any international text of the United Nations translated into their own language. In other words, or in writing, the ambiguity of language in gender and number through the 2K operation of language, metaphor or metonymy, is not necessarily a flaw in precision compared to a completely unambiguous language like in a mathematically determined formula. On the contrary, it can be the intelligent human response to a complex situation. When the sophisticated writings of novels or poetry defined by rules, the requirement of the number of syllable pronouns, rhymes, or stress accent, shifts common usage. it says something about the language itself. It informs us about its use, its potential, its misuse intended to take root and make it evolve. But it also produces complex meaning for the human brain. Could psychoanalysis in turn be threatened by a machine analysis? A great science fiction topics, perhaps, even linked to the automatic writings of the surrealist. Colonization of the brain. We can also relate the different aspects of artificial intelligence to the three forms of intelligence distinguished by specialists in cognition and neuroscience. In his book Right Brain, Left Brain, Lucien Israel differentiated for his part the left brain, home to analytical, logical, and Piagetian intelligence. Piagetian intelligence is between 7 to 12 or 15. The right brain with synthetic, spatial intelligence, home to the understanding of complexity, the whole. The whole is different of the sum of the parts, you see, which is the true definition of complexity. Imagination, artistic ability, but also sensory motor intelligence governing attraction, fears, movement, and desire. Olivier Houdet more recently proposed introducing a third intelligence that governed the inhibitory function of the previous two, developing later, up to 19 years old, three dimensions of reason, which are all components of human intelligence, show up in this question of language. On the left brain side, there is its logic through grammar and syntax, its systematization, its form, and so on. Then, echoing the right brain intelligence, there is a sensitivity to language, scenes in semantic, vocabulary, intentionality, shifting meaning from literal to figurative, metaphor, and so on. Finally, reflecting what might be a third kind of intelligence, the challenge is mastering the performative aspect of language, like the ethical weight of moral commands, such as a prohibition against killing. In reality, the reality of what generative AI is doing today echoes what Bill Anderson identified as the most crucial shift in scientific truth in a key 2008 article, The End of Theory, the Data Deluge Makes the Scientific Method Obsolete. According to him, the ability to capture traces of digital user interaction as a data deluge can replace logical reasoning. Of course, if you have very few occurrences, this principle is completely ridiculous. But if you are dealing with billions, even trillions of cases, it becomes fairly robust in terms of probability and proves capable of providing an immense variety of resources. The interaction, once traced and stored as raw data, in turn serves as a resource to produce various applications in marketing, design, semantic production, innovation, creation, blah, blah. Since the applications are paid, access to the service provided by the platform can end up being free. And that's what Tariq has explained to us in very luminous terms. Tracked and stored interaction as basic data, in turn, serve as raw material for producing multiple applications in marketing, design, and semantic production. The platform economy, therefore, just mimics and collects general intellect or human intelligence has it engaged with digital contents device of all kinds. The inventiveness and collective intelligence captured and deployed in this way represent a new type of capitalist accumulation that exploit living labor far beyond just the expenditure of muscle, energy, or pay work time on a task or a service provided. Over the past 40 years, digital capitalism has learned to exploit what Marx in the Grundrisse 1857-58 manuscript called collective general intelligence. Quote, with this upheaval, neither the labor time used nor the immediate labor performed by humans appear as the main foundation of production and wealth. It is the appropriation of their general productive power, their understanding of nature, and their ability to master it. And of course, let's talk about a movement that now continues in the form of what could be called the new digital commons. The general intellect or general knowledge of society having been digitized and stored, so it can be calculated, recalculated billions of times, now presents itself for each individual who is part of this collective intelligence and use it daily as a condition for carrying out that activity, so like the oxygen necessary to their brain, access condition via hardware, computer, via platform, via apps, especially via processing software, and now with generative AI, through the recurrent use of data, collective intelligence in the old digital era presents itself as the ultimate capital, as a condition not only of wage-dependent work, but also of any cognitive, sensory, or cultural activity. Why the? That is the single condition. Because the tied-up capital is out of reach, not just from any individual brain or any salaried worker, but also for classical individual entrepreneurship, like the Schumpeter's one. And because this phenomena of colonization by digital capitalism of the promising lands of general and collective intelligence happens through the conquest of maybe a new common language. Digital or cognitive capitalism has won the battle of open source, presenting itself as a contemporary communism against supporter of free software, Stallman Creative Commons-like license. There is a very simple reason for this collective intelligence data is harvested on platforms that represent a massive accumulation of capital. The same goes for data stored in data farms or in hardware network of the internet. Only states and private capital are able to exploit collective intelligence. Supporters of free software and Creative Commons license are thus relegated to a kind of sympathetic role. Changing the game would require regulation of these new digital commons, free access to data, funding for public data, strict definition of the boundary of the digital common lands, where aimless grazing is encouraged, etc. Finally, with open source, drastically reducing copyright, the independence and autonomy of collective intelligence and digital pollination could only be ensured by a pollination income. So I go there. Digital capitalism has set out to conquer the complex and to colonize the right brain far beyond what industrial capitalism managed to do with the rational intelligence of the left brain. And by the way, through its alliance with arts. Because without innovation, without creativity, digital capitalism falls into entropy. Its frenetic investment in AI aims to capture the value sources that come from mental pollination, which is two whole forms of profit and exploitation. Two old forms of profit and exploitation, what honey production is to be pollination. Platform capitalism, surveillance capitalism, or control capitalism are related and perfectly logical manifestation of cognitive capitalism, but not a mutation of it. Could the race for AI in general and generative AI in particular be one of the major causes of this new hidden enclosure of digital capitalism? We're not going here to rehearse all the characteristics of cognitive capitalism. See our book, Verso 2011, for the English version. But here I want to insist on one point, and it deserves a peculiar attention. The link between collective intelligence of the human brain and the more and more socialized way to crop it and control it. Three things important: from input models to output models of production to pollination model. Second point, catching complexity through complexity to preserve biodiversity and survival of life. And finally, where art is playing something, a role in that thing. Broadly speaking, mercantilism and industrial models of capitalism, the two models that preceded the third capitalism, were producing commodity by the means of commodity or capital and labor. This has been sketched as input-output models. Input as well as outputs are defined in limited number and can be evaluated precisely in capital or in price of labor. Technique could introduce something new in the output. Agency of the manpower could also add to the final result, but the externalities were assumed to be marginal. With the advent of cognitive capitalism, externality can no longer be ignored. Dealing with complex phenomena in nature, in knowledge of human living being or environment, input-output models are declining and of no use. Now when we turn to ecology, we find a completely different model for producing output but complex output. From complex input to complex output. This is what I have proposed as the emblematic way of producing value in cognitive capitalism, with a paradigm of the pollination by the bees. In short words, pollination is a way to produce complexity with the mean of complexity. It echoes the famous Zraffa formula, that is, producing commodity by the way of commodity. Here we produced complexity by the mean of complexity. Beside the classical and traditional view of the production of honey by domestication of the bee, which go back to the maybe 3,000 years before Christ. The close study of La Vie des Abeilles, a famous book by Maeterlinck, the Belgian writer, 1962-1949, who published in 1901 something which one think that had an important impact on Einstein's formulation of relativity. It made it clear that in terms of economic value, the real input of the bee represents between 7 150 to 5,000 times the value of honey. Pollination is necessary for producing many agricultural products, but also biodiversity in general. This is why I wrote The Economist of the Bee after Cognitive Capitalism. It is only translated into Spanish now. I have argued that political economists must undertake a complex revolution, or the revolution of the complex. The weight of positive as well as negative externality is fundamental. What traditional economy has considered as the core, the hardcore of value and economy, is but a little part of it. And observe how intelligence, artificial intelligence, and the tenets of artificial intelligence make the same assessment. They say, material production, production on the world, is but nothing. You will see what we are able to produce in March and somewhere. So you have the same framing of the traditional economy, political economy, and it corresponds to mutation in finance, also fundamental. What political is but a little part of it. So production of complexity by means of complexity, particularly biodiversity, by the means of biodiversity, is the core of economics. Inasmuch as disequilibrium in biodiversity is at the core of ecological problems of the planet, of the survival of the living being, including humans. So, producing complexity by means of complexity and giving an intelligent answer to the complex problem of human conditions through tools, including machine technology, but also language, has always been human main affair, including affairs in the meaning of business. Human people, from the very beginning, has tried to solve complex problems with complex means. It is not by chance that the various types of artificial intelligence have evolved following not only mathematical forms of complexity, but the complexity of use of oral language, which is the case of connectionism or deep learning, and after the use of written language, LLM language, and now world models. So we can propose, in fact, some guidelines for the use of AI. Good usage, misuse, neutral usage. The use of AI is under constraint. You notice certainly energy consumption, which is maybe a less big problem than water consumption. But also consumption of rare earths for chips and greenhouse gas emission. But I would add to those limits to uncontrolled development of AI we are facing now. I would add a sort of rule which is proportionality between output and inputs. Proportionality is that you don't kill a fly with a hammer. I would say when you're an artist, when you're writing novels, where you're an essayist, a translator, you could make a use of certain tools, but you will use certain tools, but certainly not world models. When you want to produce a material result that can be reached by input-output model classical, you don't need to use artificial intelligence. That would cost you a fortune. Even if you do, you spare money let's say, sparing people, putting them on the dole and that sort of things. But even with that, if you use the world model, it will cost something. Maybe I will add some principle very important, which not by chance AI was incapable of imitating, of using, is irony, humor, distance, parody. It has been noticed that you take the same literary sentence, and in any kind of human being will understand the parodistic, the irony, the humor, which is the irony of despair. Every human, including young lecturer, will understand that there is a distance and so on. The artificial intelligence cannot. Maybe he will master it when he can refer to an essay about the parody in this and this thing. But we had seen the same problem with the first essays in translation, automatic translation. La chair est triste, hélas, et j'ai lu tous les livres. The famous sonnet by Mallarmé, who has translated by the machine. The meat is raw, and I don't know, a misunderstanding totally of the metaphor, of the metonymy, of the everything, all the tropes of language. So humor, distance, parody could certainly be, with a rational, ecological use of AI, one modest but practical path towards limitation of these emballements. I don't know how you translate emballement. I cannot.
Entanglement?
No, emballement. Emballer, you're a no, when you're totally seduced and you're
Overwhelmed?
Oh yeah. So that's the way, if you wish, the thing I was suggesting. And art in all this mess, I think we don't have to say that AI is harm or something horrible and something that we have to make, let's say, to tame the beast. Tame the beast is a very, where's the dog? It's a very humble system, but quite efficient. So, and I have nothing to add to what Warren has said and many old speakers in this sentence. So here it is. And thank you for listening. And if you had questions.
Thank you so much, Yann. Now we welcome Martha Schwendener. Please. Okay. Martha's an art historian and art critic for the New York Times. She's a visiting associate professor at New York University and a researcher in residence at the Wilhelm Flusser Archive in Berlin. She's the editor of Wilhelm Flusser's essays, Art Forum, Metaflux 2017, and her criticism and essays have been published in Art Forum, Art in America, After Image, Book Forum, Critical Inquiry, The New Yorker, October, and many other publications. She will present Wilhelm Flusser and AI. Let's welcome Martha. Looks like we have just a minute while she's getting her computer. So let me remind our audience online that tomorrow we will tune in at 10 in the morning, Central European Time, to hear David W. Bates and Hiro Style. Then from 10 to 2 Central European Time, we will have a roundtable from 2 to 4. Okay, here's Martha.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, great. All right, thank you. Thanks, Yann. Thanks to all the other speakers. I've sort of retitled my talk. It was Vilém, Flusser, and Artificial Intelligence. And then I just realized I hadn't spent that much time thinking about Vilém, Flusser, and artificial intelligence. I've spent a significant amount of time thinking about Vilém, Flusser, is that I see he puts parentheses around the S quite frequently, or says intelligences, which is something for all of us to think about. And of course, it's notes, because I am really just in the beginning stages of thinking about this. So I'm going to do two things here today. One is talk about this book that I just published that I've been working on for quite a number of years, and at the same time talk about AI. So the book is 5 chapters, so I'll tell you as the chapters go so you can sort of pace yourself for the last talk of the day. And also talk about artificial intelligence. The book itself is about the philosopher Vilém Flusser. He was born in Prague and then moved down to Brazil and then back to Europe. You'll sort of see the migration in terms of this PowerPoint. But what's most important is the fact that in terms of philosophy, and a little bit rare, is the amount of artistic collaboration that went into the formation of his philosophy or philosophies. So, okay, so this is the book. And I should just say as a quick note, he is best known pretty much around the world at this point in time for these 3 books, what are called his technical image trilogy. And you can see the first one was titled Towards a Philosophy of Photography, but he was kind of drafting on the popularity of photography in the 70s and 80s. And I could go more into how he got involved with photography, but he was really using that as a sort of subterfuge for talking about what he called technical images, which was anything produced by a technical apparatus. So it could be, instead of just photography, it could be film, it could be video, it could be one of his favorites, holograms, it could be, into our moment, AI. And as I said right here, artificial intelligence is mentioned quite a bit in the last book. But because he did die in 1991, he didn't, really get, obviously, to see what we're dealing with. If he was coming up in what was called the digital revolution, now you see frequently the AI revolution. But what's interesting about him is, like many people, if there's one single thing in the 20th century in philosophy, it was like language, whether it was Wittgenstein, who was somebody who was very interested in the Vienna School, Carnap, all these people, these are who he was reading initially, and he initially decided that he was going to be involved with language. However, sorry, I'm in this view here that's not easy for me to read. Can you help me 1 second? Can you take it out of the reader view? Because I can't see that well enough. You can't really.
Maybe is it that?
I don't know. That's okay. I'll just blow it up.
Maybe
I'll just blow it up.
kind of make that sense more too.
I'm just gonna have to blow everyone up. Or I'll read it up here. Thanks. Thank you.
If you zoom here, does that? Oh,
Yeah,
no, it's zooming
that's fine.
that
That's fine.
too.
Okay. All right. So the thing is, in terms of language, though, there's a sort of deep history to this because he was from Prague. He was Jewish. He wrote in German initially, did not write in Czech. which most people didn't. And so I'm not going to read all the quotes that come up. I've kind of put all my content into the slides here. But this is actually a pretty wonderful essay, not very well known. It's called Waiting for Kafka, where he's thinking about Kafka's use of German and what it does, as a colonized subject, but very specifically the type of German that Kafka was using. And he says that Kafka's use of High German, meaning bureaucratic Austro-Hungarian German, was thrust upon him as a Prague Jew, structured his thoughts, but more importantly, sort of created this climate in which you had a single man who has been forgotten by an all-powerful yet careless and incompetent bureaucratic apparatus, and who, without the least capacity for anger, seeks in vain to have himself recognized. Today, 1967, it does not take too much to imagine that a similar situation could be a fundamental problem in the near future. Nevertheless, there's a difference between imagining a situation and actually experiencing that. The sort of deep history also for 1967 is that after the Nazis invaded Prague in 1939, Flusser had to leave. He went to Brazil with his future wife's family, but the rest of his nuclear family, the entire family, was killed in Nazi concentration camps. So for him, this kind of Kafkaesque, and of course, Kafka didn't live to see this, but his own sisters were killed in the Nazi camps as well. That this was, a profound sort of thinking about language and something that would be important for him, apparatus, which you can see in there, and that now we talk about quite a bit in terms of AI and the apparatus. The other thing I want to point out, and that I discuss in this initial chapter of the book, is the fact that, Karl Čapek, the inventor of the term robot, is also from Prague. This isn't just incidental. This is I think it's probably my photograph of Flusser's copy of the Čapek with his brother's illustrations. But one of the things when you talk about artificial intelligence that's becoming more and more important is this idea of what is it? Is it the helper? Or, as you can see here, the original term for robot involved this very subservient thing, whether you want to say serf or you want to actually use the term slave. So for Flusser, this isn't just a kind of, hey, robots, it was very serious in terms of his thinking. You'll also see this come up later in his writings in the 1980s. Okay, still in the first chapter. After leaving Prague, he migrates to Brazil, and there are three things that really affect his thinking, and three things that have a lot to do with language, and I think personally serve as this kind of, when you hear the term deep time in the media, somebody like Siegfried Zielinski, I think these are a kind of deep time in the media of AI, very clearly. So the number one is abstraction, and he was very good friends with this artist, Samson Flusser, who is also a refugee and immigrant, and he had been in the French Resistance. And you can see here, it looks kind of funny. Oh, he set up his the first abstract atelier in Brazil, but it's very important that, there's a child there, that this was a revolutionary idea, that this was going to be something that was going to be an alternative to written language in terms of Flusser's thinking. And another thing you have to keep in mind, of course, is that Brazil speaks Portuguese-speaking country in a continent where most people speak Spanish. The other thing that I like to credit this photo, just in terms of thinking about community, if you're not familiar with Jacques Doucet, a really wonderful weaver whose work is getting a lot more attention now. So this kind of art community in Brazil. Now, this one, I think also, once I start reading it through the lens of AI, really is profound for me. This is an artist who he was very close with. They both read philosophy together, sometimes philosophy that we haven't all read, like the philosopher named Jean Gebser, who is from Switzerland, and that's a whole other story, kind of a sort of New Age type philosopher. But she had also immigrated, got stripped of her citizenship in Italy, Jewish, moved to Brazil. And she was painting abstractly. I've sort of jumped ahead to the work in the 60s, but you can see graphic objects. But these graphic objects are using language. And again, through the AI lens, it's so hard for me not to think of these almost as tokens, that she's really taken apart language here. Flusser and she collaborated in different ways. This is in the newspaper. I want to flag that again. Also, newspaper. You're going to see a couple of newspaper things. And Flusser wrote for the newspaper. I write for the newspaper. So newspaper is, one of these, again, kind of early networks of, pre-internet, all kinds of things around the newspaper. But this is his text and her drawings. And then she also designed the cover for his first book, which you can see, Language and Reality, where his first initial thought was that he was going to be a language philosopher, and then got dragged over into images, which I'll show you in a little bit. He says here that he's trying to kind of make sense of these works, and he calls the language or the markings in the drawings, which include the one that was in the last slide, as pretexts. They are what texts are before they become text, but as they are almost symbolic as pretexts, they cannot be read as drawings either, not in the traditional sense of the term. They do not intend the thing as drawings do, though neither do they intend, as texts do, to be about things. They should not be read in a metaphorical sense, but literally. So here you have like a really kind of, again, the 60s, kind of mind-blowing approach to language and art, and really instrumental to see what you're going to see a little bit later on. And then again, when I look at, very often her graphic objects were set up in this way so that the light would pass through. But when I started reading more and seeing all these AI diagrams and thinking about architectures of AI, I just thought, oh my God, this is like the schematic for the transformer, all these different types of things, or the vector space. So, and of course you could dispute that and say, oh, that's just kind of a morphological thing. But again, thinking in terms of what I've been looking at all these years in terms of Flusser and his associations and how language takes on all these different forms. The other thing that happens, again, I'm still in the first chapter, he's gone down in Brazil, 1950s, 60s, etc., is concrete poetry. So here again, you see what is going to sort of jump ahead a little bit. His interest in technical images is that they break down linearity. So if writing sets up linear thought, then images are more about superficial reading. However, so is concrete poetry. It's not about linear reading. It's about the surface. It's also very political in the sense that, we're used to in the United States, for instance, all these pop art images that are about Coke, but they're a little bit more neutral, maybe even celebratory, whereas this is a very, in fact, this is a very friendly translation where they say cesspool. It's more kind of like shit. Here's a little quote from my book. I took it out because it's, for me, the most concise version of how he sort of saw concrete poetry. Concrete poetry was concerned with the physical aspects of language, spatial, syntax, typography, color, design, sound, translation, and the poem as an object. It drew from advertising, product logos, and street signage, as well as from Mondrian's constructivist paintings, Marshall McLuhan's media theories, John Cage's aleatory music, and the bold layout of Edition Gallimard's books. It also looks forward to the way text is presented on screens in the digital age. Of course, my book is called Society of the Screen, so I sort of refer to this as one of the first screens. All right. Still in the first chapter, this one's got a lot some only have a couple of slides. Another really formative thing with his philosophy, both in the practical sense and the philosophical sense, is the Sao Paulo Biennial. And when I saw this image of the Sao Paulo Biennial, I was like, that image has to be in the book. It kind of encapsulates biennials. You know, we're in the middle now of the Venice Biennale and these sort of platforms for protest as much as anything else. The Sao Paulo Biennial was the second biennial after Venice, and also very much a kind of nation-building type project. And here you can see, you know, the performer, capoeirista, you know, a person of color, possibly even from a favela, performing for these top government officials, including military officials. And Flusser would have to leave Brazil because there was a military coup in 1964, military dictatorship from 1964 to 85. So he leaves. Second chapter. But this biennial in some ways also serves as a platform for him to be able to leave Brazil and kind of plug back into Europe. And here again, the newspaper. And it's a little washed out on the screen. It's a little better here. But this is a French artist that he worked with in the early 70s. He also recommended him for a biennial, Fred Forest. Fred might be watching. Hey, Fred. What he did is he got this corner of the newspaper, obviously quite a feat in some ways, particularly when I think of the newspaper today, it would be almost impossible for an American to get, or any artist to get a corner of the New York Times. But at any rate, you would fill out, you know, do whatever, create your own thing in this open space in the paper, and then you would mail it back to him, and he would, Fred, that is, he would exhibit it. And of course, you had the kind of puerile. Apparently, he would get a lot of mails and whatever. But then you'd have all these other kind of interventions. And, you know, this is, again, we could talk about this for a long time. The newspaper, you know, the relational, the interactive, the person interacting with media. You know, when we talk about AI, that's obviously a big part of the conversation. The other thing I just want to throw in here with Fred is this work that Flusser, again, recommended him for this biennial. And he had people, as you can see here, he hired participants from an agency that specialized in providing people for street advertising to carry blank placards through the street, defying the military government's restrictions on free speech and public assembly. When he got back to France, he and Flusser got in this kind of heated argument. Flusser was basically, what are you doing? It's a military dictatorship, you know, and whatever. But Fred was quite an interventionist. All right. The other thing in this second chapter, you know, the biennial, you know, going back to Europe, is cybernetics. So these are the two artists that Flusser wrote about. Obviously, cybernetics and the relationship to AI has, you know, been widely discussed. I don't need to do the introductory on that. But just to tell you his involvement and how it changed his philosophy is that he wrote about Nicolas Chauffeur, who's, you know, French-based, very well-known cybernetic artist, and also a New York-based artist, Wenying Tsai. I want to also point out, Tsai was one of the founders of Art Workers, which was a very prominent protest movement, along with Takis and some other people. Doesn't always get credit for it. But this idea of systems and feedback, that all of a sudden, in the same way that he saw with concrete poetry, these kind of screens, and Mira Chandel, this, like, you know, here he was going in, like, reading Carnap, and then all of a sudden he's hanging out with Mira Chandel. Then he's with Tsai, and just seeing what kind of, to pick up on what Yann and Warren were talking about, what art can do, or what the possibilities are in this moment, which is the 60s and 70s. All right, so then third chapter. So there are only 5 chapters, so we're we're getting there. All right, this is the one that he's famous for. These are the 3 books in German, the Technical Image Trilogy. And it is really, when I encountered it, because I kind of encountered it alone. I was never taught Flusser. I taught myself Flusser because he's still not super widely known in the United States. And if you already have a question, if he's not widely known, what do people still read? They still read Benjamin, they still read Roland Barthes, they still read Susan Sontag. So Flusser is seen as like a little bit exotic. And for me, again, sort of teaching myself Flusser, the language was just kind of mind-blowing. I didn't even really know what I was dealing with initially, and then I started to realize it was coming out of things like information aesthetics. I'm not going into that too much, although you'll see the ripples of it. People like Max Benza and Abraham Moll were the 2 information aesthetics people who were using things like information theory and the new kind of psychology. I say that, I emphasize it because of the way that AI, is coming out of statistics and psychology and some of these very, you don't think they're going to relate to technology, and then they do. So in terms of looking, Flusser loved to do these lexicons, and they're very cryptic. Apparatus is one of his main ideas, and the apparatus, a toy that simulates thought. That just doesn't even make any sense, But then what apparatus was for him is that it was this kind of all-encompassing thing, and you see apparatus all the time with AI now. Apparatuses are often, and he used this term quite a bit, black boxes. They're opaque, they don't have transparency, only specialists know how to use them. His primary apparatus within the context of these writings was the camera. You can't see in it, although you'll see somewhere where you can see in it in a minute. And of course, very much with the phones, now people talk about the algorithm as a black box. Images, information. One of the ones I want to highlight here is the term magic. And you can see, and I quoted myself, easiest thing to do, technical images are produced by technological apparatuses which result from scientific texts. And yet, despite their ties to science, technical images are magical. They seduce and bewitch viewers. Think of an infant in front of a television for the first time, or a crowd of adults, eyes glued to their smartphones. When I copied and pasted that into the thing, I always think the subway. All you have to do is look up the subway card. Every person is on their phone. So the thing with the magic, we could talk about that for quite a while, but there's a whole thing with AI in terms of like it's magical, that it's another way of sort of, in a sense, kind of, pushing the opacity of it, that it's, I have some nice quotes. Maybe I took them out, but people are like, it's not magical. It's made by humans. What are you talking about? Let's see if there are any other ones. This is one I won't talk about too much today, but I do think it's interesting. Program, a game of combinations with clear and distinct elements. Game theory, another big thing that is influenced a lot of the I also, when I say AI, I'm not meaning a monolithic thing. I don't believe in that. I think that is, a lot of people are talking about task-specific AIs. And I sort of skew that way, but there is this idea in terms of what has gone into the making of them. Let's see, do I want to mention any other things here? Yeah, and the program, his idea is that the camera or the apparatus programs you. You're given this thing. It's going to tell you how to use it, and that's, of course, what we're fighting with AI at this moment. Here's a kind of prototypical apparatus. Every artist is Flusserian in a sense if they're pushing back at the apparatus, but my choices for artists that I used in this book were people who really kind of on the ground with it. So Christopher Williams would be what you would call kind of early adopter of Flusser. And, you know, for a long time when I saw these photographs, I was like, well, they're cool. You know, they're very like post-conceptual, influenced by advertising, all this kind of stuff. You know, I shouldn't, I don't want to drift too far off, but, you know, Christopher Williams studied with Michael Asher, great, you know, conceptual artist and whatever. So he's kind of working in that vein. But after I read Flusser, all I had to do was look at this image and realize, you know, what I was really dealing with. These I'm not going to describe too much. These images are all in the book. We heard from Lynn Hirschman-Leeson the other day. Paul Sepulia is a younger, newer artist. But again, thinking about the apparatus and the body. And Thomas Struth, you know, no bodies involved there. But the idea with the apparatus is, again, it's something, if you look at that, you have no idea what it's doing. But the apparatuses, these kind of specialist apparatuses, maybe things that are killing you or trying to keep you alive. So, all right, still within this third chapter and thinking about photography, but again, in the expanded sense. Here is a term that is obviously quite, you know, specific to AI, which is generative. So somebody that Flusser worked with quite closely during his lifetime, which is to say they did a lot of symposia together. They wrote about each other's work. Jaeger's still alive. I'm in contact with him. He's a very nice man. And he was a pioneer of generative photography, which is to say having the camera generate the image. And he's another person, when I was talking about Max Benza and people like that, there's a long history of this that is often, again, our audience is international, which is very nice. But in the US, they weren't always so welcoming to Max Benza and people like that, information aesthetics. But this idea that if you'd gone through the Holocaust and the war in Europe, that maybe machines could do a better job. So it's not a kind of full techno-pessimism. It's a little bit more, I wouldn't say utopian, but a little bit more weighted in terms of, I guess you would say, sort of generally, the politics and the machine. And then I have a couple of quotes down here. Leif Weatherby's written this nice book called Language Machines, really thinking about language and the humanities and other things, but and AI. And he says the generative matrix of language has proven shockingly able to make convincing images. This is one of the things that you're going to see with Flusser is, you know, here, as I mentioned, concrete poetry, very simply a new way of configuring language, but also, in a sense, deploying it. So we're going to talk more about that. Hito Steyerl, brand new book, also generative AI is probably something more and less than images, i.e. she's coined this term damages for data images. So this idea of what's generative, again, you hear generative AI, but it's got a very long history in recent art. This is in your show, in the world through AI. So Juan Foncuberta, this is a kind of nice thing in the sense, thinking about, because you see this very, you know, you see the Jaeger and the abstract and the kind of almost machinic type of artwork. And then you see something like this. It looks organic, but the key here is that these are not real. These are fictional plants. And this, again, is our whole sense. What's real, what's not. You know, you think of the AI image. This is, you know, but these, this is what's so incredible about so many of this generation of artists is that they're really looking ahead to something that's going to truly explode. This is a really wonderful essay by Flusser from 1966, which deals with this idea of fiction. So I'll read this, a little bit of this quote. He says, "Consider Newton's renowned sentence, hypothesis non fingo, I feign no hypothesis. And consider, on the other hand, Wittgenstein's sentence, science discovers nothing, it invents it." So he's trying to really clue us in again about these like extraordinary epistemological changes. The contradiction between the two sentences reveals a profound alteration in our concept of reality and fiction, something that's going to keep coming up. of discovery and invention, of what is taken for granted and unquestionable. In fact, it reveals a loss of faith in self-evident and discoverable reality, and it exposes our situation as a fiction that has been invented and established by us. The sense of everything that surrounds being fiction, I'm going to get back to that, being fictitious and of pretense as the atmosphere of our times is the theme of our current time as well as this present article. So, this is 1966, and he's thinking about these kind of speculative ideas. The other term that I want to flag here is immaterial. We saw this in Yann's talk, the Les Immatériaux from 1985. He went to this exhibition, he included it in this 1986 essay, The Photograph as Post-Industrial Object, an essay on the ontological standing of photographs. Well, the basic idea is that photographs are not going to have a physical substrate anymore. They're going to exist in immaterial form, or maybe as software, but also on screens. I think he says that in here. Yeah, on electromagnetic screens. So, this is one of those things. There's the whole, the book Greening the Media and things like that. You can push back very hard on that and say, data centers, AI is not immaterial. But there's certain ways in which it's immaterial. And you see here, again, the Weatherby, where he's talking about LLMs, just on a language level, dematerialize the already immaterial. Suddenly, the very synthesis of meaning as such comes in packages, instantly delivered, not just for bureaucracy, but also for financial decisions, the flow of information, and global logistics. To keep on that immaterialism thread there for a minute, what's the immaterial material? One of his examples of technical images that he used quite a bit was holograms. And so this is somebody that he knew very well, Dieter Jung, one of the big hologram artists. And I won't go too much into this quote. This is from an essay called Immaterialism. But he's really in this moment where, the physical object is dissolving in a sense and becoming this almost kind of mirage. And then now it's the screen. Let's see, what do I want to say about that? I'll keep going. All right, here we'll have an interlude. This is one of his close artists, Thomas Byrell. From 1993, a lot of these, this is in the museums, at the museum, but there are a number of Thomas Byrell images in the book and they are, in a sense, proto-AI from my standpoint. I could talk about them for quite a while, but it's funny. Thomas Byrell did a lot of things that are very, he did them totally by hand. Almost in the same way now where people talk about coding. I spent weeks coding and now, vibe coding and it's all done. I could draw that out for you. It's not just whatever. Okay, back to text and image. This is one of his most famous collaborations with the artist Haroon Farooqui. In here you can see in this video they made together, it was broadcast on TV. So remember, newspapers now all of a sudden television. You've got these kind of different, as Friedrich Kittler would call it, discourse networks. I want to really point out here the text-image relationship because from a philosophical standpoint, this is one of Flusser's great things, is that instead of clinging on to language, that he really kind of followed these artists down these paths of seeing what they're talking about in this video is how on the front page of a tabloid newspaper, text becomes image and image becomes text, in a sense. Weatherby, LLMs present perhaps the deepest synthesis of word and number to date, and they require us to train our theoretical gaze on this interface. Later in the 80s, in the second two technical image books, Flusser stops doesn't stop, but he expands. He was in correspondence with a guy, I can go into that, but a literary theorist and poet and translator who really pushed him on the term technical image, and he expanded it to synthetic images, which would be kind of computer automated images and things of that nature. The other thing with Faroki, I mentioned, remember, games. You know, I said that in that lexicon of photography. We obviously know that the game theory, I'm putting that extremely broadly, but in post-war, well, the whole world, but particularly in post-war US, that was really, you know, part of the tech infrastructure, you know, a kind of philosophical substrate. So here's one of Faroki's last projects that is talking about the military's use of gaming. And in fact, most of Faroki's last works had to do with gaming technology. So yeah, and here I got a nice Kate Crawford quote about this idea of gaming and signal and noise, things of that nature. Hito, who we're going to hear from tomorrow. I have this image in the book. The reason I have this image in the book is because, some of you can probably guess, this is almost like a perfect illustration of what was called the Bilderflut, the image flood. And that was a term that was very popular in the 80s and 90s with all of a sudden this extraordinary proliferation of images, and then beyond extraordinary proliferation, just off the charts, you know, with social media and YouTube and all of those things. So very clever work, you know, using Hokusai's wave and also talking about global flows capital, very good work. I also have the one from this work is everywhere right now. It's in the New Humans show, it's in the AI shows, but this is one of Hito's new works. And I'm interested in this because one of the things we heard about a little earlier this week is vector space. And one of the things that Flusser was really interested in with this kind of rise of image and the dissolution of text is this idea of vectors. And this was a little more abstract in terms of his reasoning for it. But and I think this is a little cut off. This is my own quote. For Flusser, traditional texts and images have a vector pointing outward to the world. They are designed to signify or explain objects, concepts, and the historical events occurring around us. Technical images have inverted the vectors. Rather than signifying something that already exists, they project abstract concepts, mathematical formulas, and programmed information onto a screen. I have project there highlighted because near the end of his life, he was theorizing this idea. It was from subject, like human subject, to project, you know, that you were this sort of projection. Yeah, more about the inverted vectors and yeah. All right, the last book in the technical image trilogy is called Does Writing Have a Future? And so because our primary AI at the moment really, I think, I don't know if it's too hard to argue this, is large language models, that then it comes back to language. And for Flusser, the answer to does writing have a future was no, that it was going to disappear and become this kind of specialist skill, like whatever, other things. And he wasn't pushing back too hard on this. People would contact him, hey, you want to do a hypertext? Sure, why not, you know? But he wasn't thinking it was going to remake the world of writing. I personally was just in Greece, and I always go to this archaeological museum in Rhodes. I call this the Flusser room because it's about the beginning of writing. And it is kind of funny because he would always talk about writing going, you know, being invented 3,000 years ago or whatever it is. And so whenever I go into this room and they're describing, they're very proud of it because, you know, this linear writing is invented in the general area. You know, there's linear A, linear B. There's cuneiform. So they're showing, and what Flusser's original argument was, well, yeah, writing was really revolutionary, and it did change society. And it says this here, too. When we were talking about writing some of the earlier lectures, I was thinking of my little slide here, which I just think is hilarious. This is the earliest version of writing from Rhodes, but it's actually not in the Rhodes Museum. It's in Copenhagen. But what the inscription on the cup is, this is my cup. So, I know, it's like ownership, whatever, immediately. So you don't need to romanticize linear writing. At any rate, for Flusser, though, this was disappearing. But when I go to a museum like this and I see this, and again, it's almost like kind of, because I can't read it, it's almost like tokens, abstract thing. And for him, image is overriding linear thought, and this is the kind of contested world we're living in. Just to kind of nail this down a little bit, he said, machines write faster than human beings. We can already see both the speed and the variability of writing in the new orthographic writing machines. Word processors, however primitive they still are for now, and artificial intelligences will surely become more intelligent in the future. Does writing have a future? Lydia Liu, I'm always interested in the Wittgenstein angle, because that was really one of Flusser's first loves in the 50s. Like, I'm going to be a language philosopher, Wittgenstein. I learned a lot more. Wittgenstein and the Machine is actually a wonderful essay where she's talking about Turing sitting in on Wittgenstein's lectures, the two of them getting in the fight argument. The Turing machine being a possible retort to Wittgenstein. Very juicy stuff. But she says machine learning and AI technologies have been part of a major philosophical breakthrough, even if their practitioners remain unaware of it, fundamentally rewriting how humans understand language, communication, and the mind. All right, and then Yann was just mentioning poetry. Poetry's been brought up a lot during our situation here. And I just thought I would throw in, he says, is there going to be a future of reading? But again, back to this idea, when you have these kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not errant, deviant forms of language. Poetry is often the deviant form of language because it's artists, they're breaking the program, they're doing what they're supposed to do. But now this very interesting essay that was just published, I think I neglected to put the date, but this is a very new essay, maybe from a couple months ago, talking about poetry being used as one of the jailbreaking techniques with AI models. So all of a sudden you have this kind of repurposing of poetry in a very interesting way. All right, the fourth chapter is about nature, putting that very broadly. And these are a couple of books, but the opus is Vampiroteuthis Infernalis, which is about a squid. Why would that have anything to do with AI? It's kind of right down there. Vampiroteuthis is our other. It's also back to fiction. This is wonderful artist, Louis Beck, more popular to French nodding. When I say it to American, they're like, never heard of the guy. He's an incredible artist. So he was trained, in scientific illustration, but these are actually fictional creatures. So back to this idea of fiction that I was talking about. But what's really important and really sticking out to me is this idea of the other and the alien. And you go back to this idea with the robots, that they're the other. Are they the slave? Are they the serf? Are they here to serve us? And this is, a lot of thinking about this. Not enough, but at least people are sort of belatedly, where they're talking about these agents as a difficult and disconcerting admixture of familiarity and otherness. And then all the stuff that has been discussed quite a bit, the environmental problems, et cetera. But start with that one. And then here, how do we kind of push back against that? So this is an image that I have in my book maybe it was 2 years ago, I took a class with this AI being by Rashad Newsom. And so it's this idea that, okay, well, how do you not make the AI the other? And these are Rashad's terms, that it's designed to challenge the biases of mainstream big tech with a counter-hegemonic algorithm. And again, to this idea of aliens, which is something that Flusser is very interested in. You know, it could be the squid. I didn't go too much into what the dialectic is there with the squid, but you know, the argument is the AI alien, or this one over here, you know, that says, well, it's kind of weird that you're saying they're aliens or magic when we made them. The new term, you know, the new field is interpretability, you know, so probably David can tell us more about that. And then this slide, also what's important with Vampy, Vampiroteuthis infernalis, is that it was a very differently abled being. It's a dialectic. The squid lives at the bottom of the sea. We live up here, and we cannot survive in each other's habitats. However, there was some questions about Darwin earlier. You know, Darwin would say we were the more evolved species, but from Flusser's standpoint, the squid is more evolved because it's been living in its habitat for 170 million years, like thriving. Back to this, though, why I put this in is there's a whole thing that I do talk about in the book, disability studies, you know. What is abled? What is differently abled? People are temporarily abled. I think AI brings up an extremely interesting idea, you know, because it is, if you're AI proficient, what if you're not? Are you all of a sudden disabled? So it can be the body or not. And one of our colleagues here, David, just sent this new exhibition. Everybody can see it. Slow AI from the Crypt Tech Incubator. All right, so I'm pulling to a close here. One thing I did want to mention, what was very important to Flusser is this idea of the Umwelt, and it's been mentioned several times. Warren just mentioned the Umwelt. I love that Warren said the human Umwelt is a screen. I was like, well, there you go, and the cloud. But it is this early 19th century idea, early 20th century, of the surrounding world. And it's really just quite extraordinary how many AI people use it, the idea of the Umwelt. And, you know, there's a lot we could go into it. But this was a very big thing for Flusser. So whenever I'm reading AI and they're talking about the Umwelt, I'm like, well, there you go. I'll let you watch this video. We're almost done here. So this is, I think we're doing a reader, and I submitted a paper that I published in Critical Inquiry, and I included an image of this work that is a fossil. An ammonite is extinct, but Aki Inumata made a resin cast of the ammonite shell, and then what you've got there is an octopus. So both the Vampiroteuthis and the octopus descend from the ammonite. So this is an octopus crawling into its ancestor's shell, which is a really creepy, but it's also very beautiful. And then also you think about the Umwelt. So really wonderful work. Very good artist. And last chapter, design. And I only have a few. But when we talk about design and AI, I just think about it all the time. You know, this is a very simple thing for Flusser. Everything comes down to design. He was writing about design at the end of his life. He was working with an artist named Carl Gerstner. You see a perfectly titled book, Designing Programs. Gerstner was interested in using, you know, parameters, programs, you know, again, analog, but for graphic design. And then you see something for ChatGPT, and they are thinking about the same thing, matrices, parameters, the grid, you know, old school. The other thing with design is that this is from 2 months ago, that, you know, Meta and YouTube just lost this lawsuit, landmark lawsuit, because people would think it was about content when it was really about design. so that their designs were, their products were designed to be addictive. With Flusser, he's got a almost kind of contrarian, really wonderful approach to design, and I think it fits so perfectly for AI, because very often with design is, oh, wonderful design. MoMA had this long-running program called Good Design, and so it was about the kind of beneficial and good for humanity post-war, mid-century modern design. Flusser took a very different tack, and his says the word design occurs in contexts associated with cunning and deceit, that it's like a Trojan horse, that it's a trap. And I can't really think of a better description for a lot of our current technologies. So just to wrap it up here, with design, one of our big AI works is this Kate Crawford, another work that's been in many places. And, again, it's this very kind of design-driven type of work, and has to do very much with the atlas. For him, it was cartography, topology, and how those were changing geography. And, yeah, this is the last slide. And he's got his kind of utopian thing, how to get out of the black box, the question of human freedom, and pushing back against the apparatus. So that's it.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any questions? Any questions from our audience here? Any questions between the two of you? Yes, take a left. Yes, please, go ahead, Tariq.
I have a question because you talked earlier about pollination of, and in some ways this pollination already exists with software, and especially software libraries. I mean, if you look at how software evaluate over time, and how even now with even AI, it's actually using libraries have been designed by humans. And I tend to feel like we focus a lot on the data as the raw material, but sometimes the data is the software itself, and a lot of the pollination economy existed, including for large big tech who benefit from small libraries, sometimes created by one person. And I was wondering, like, how do you, because in some ways, what we're trying to do in a way, if I understand well, is that trying to figure out if either data could be organized in a similar manner to software, or is I just trying to understand, because I'm personally against the idea of data being sold and used for commercial reason. But someone could give consent. It's a very long and personal thing. But I was interested because when you talked about pollination, for me, the entire software, the way software and the way the internet itself and protocols have been evolving, have been through actually this kind of things. And I just wanted to go to what you said about design, and how in the matter of social media is by far a design problem before also being a data and content problem. And I like the last part of the presentation and really put that in evidence.
Well, there is no, I have no objection whatsoever to think that programs can pollinate and act as a pollination system. But what we should, in that case, say is that there will not be predictability on the effect obtained, because exactly like pollination, you cannot predetermine which part of a program will enter in correspondence and something which produce something, and in a very slightly different situation, it will not produce anything. So it's and the best thing is that if you look closely to the organization of finance, it imitates pollination mechanism. That is, instead of demonstrating by A plus B plus, well, it obeys this law, this law, this law, it creates a feeling. It finances anticipation, is agreement. And many things in finance works as if finance was imitating pollination as a way to seduce, bring people somewhere. It's you see, it's a way. It's a complex interactivity with that cannot be reduced precisely as an input-output system, and so it can many. In finance, many things come by contiguity. They are voisinage, you see, you're just kin to. And it's true for product, for investment, for many techniques of finance are using this this way. It could be, look like a pollination. And so I have no objection to your idea. Maybe it's a better understanding of the program than reading them and trying immediately to create a correspondence term by term to a meta program or what does it mean? You see, it creates a sort of linkage. I think it's a good thing. It's a good metaphor. I don't know if it answers your question.
I'll answer from my standpoint. I think from what I feel from the reading I've done with AI is scaling is bad, task-specific AI instead of large models. I think within the art world, you know, we have groups like New Models, you know, who are based in Berlin. And so that would be the artistic analog in a sense, that it's like designing new models, you know. And hopefully you can see in my presentation today, Flusser, and as an art historian, we had a question about art history earlier. I was sort of laughing about it. If you stay humble as an art historian, you discover quite a lot of models that you didn't know about. And somebody like Flusser had that kind of humility in the face of multiple new models. So in the end, that's why it's kind of fun to end with a very simple thing like that. Everything, you know, whatever, everything boils down to design. But then in our own kind of, that Umwelt, I didn't really go past it too far. There's Weatherby has a really wonderful term where he calls it the semiotic surround. You know, so with us in the semiotic surround, you know, I think there's huge potentiality for new models, and not to just be kind of overwhelmed with, you know, scaling and the kind of things that we've been told are the only way to live within the new Umwelt.
Hi there, everybody. I was impressed, and I'm not an expert on either, and I was hoping somebody else here is, the relationship of Flusser to Simondon. Did you feel, Anna or Ada, did you? Not really? Okay, but like these technical, the technical image and all of these. I don't know. I was just getting a feeling about that. Ada, are you? No?
I'm not sure there was a connection between them, but we should dive into that.
It's great because Agnieszka came to my talk at NYU, and she said, "Was there Stiegler? Was he?" And I said, "No, he didn't know him. Unfortunately, Flusser did die in 1991, so they were, it's like I'm overlapping, but not." And I think the person that pulls it together very nicely is Yaqui. That takes from the Simondon, takes from that. And Yaqui also did a talk when they still had international Flusser lectures. He did one, so he sort of, I should say, skirmished with Flusser, although didn't, he's a philosopher rather than a historian, so that's why I did the deep dive in this way.
I'm just curious when the term AI was really used in connection with art, because in the 90s and early 2000s, I worked with people like Mariko Mori, Karim Rashid, Orlan, and they're totally AI in retrospective, but it wasn't really used as a description. They said modern technology or something like that.
I don't know. I mean, somebody can tell me, it's in my notes. I mean, I always forget who invented the term artificial intelligence, because as soon as you cite it, oh, well, I found one 5 years earlier. But I can only say from my work, that I think it's interesting that he uses it in the plural. And part of the reason I do think he uses it in the plural is that, and I didn't really discuss this, that he's talking about his version of artificial intelligence also being neural, biological, all these other things. He was not thinking of the kind of bodiless, computation only type of things. So I can't answer your question. In art, I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting thing anyway. What does somebody mean in 1985, or it's really 85, 87, using artificial intelligence? But from my current research of AI people, they don't like this very general term. What is artificial intelligence? That it's been this kind of roving term, whether it's, LLMs, there's a whole laundry list. But from their standpoint, it's what's being funded, what's popular. LLMs are what caught on, so that becomes a catch-all for artificial intelligence.
I can answer for 85 at least. Sorry. Because I've been, many of the books you talked I've read, and I actually took time to read most of the book written before the mid-90s, because it is a different world. You have people that have a clear understanding, a vision. They're not trying to sell either their company or themselves or some kind of a thing. So the complete nature changed, but in the mid-80s, we were still trying to make symbolic work. There was this idea of giving common sense to a machine by tautology, and there were a lot of work on expert systems. So there was this idea that the humans would be able to control the possibilities of a machine. It was not non-deterministic. Now and what you also said earlier, that I found fascinating, is that we're moving from a deterministic automation, where workers could actually use tools for better working, and you see in Toyota and other things, it improved their lives because it's better when the robot takes the hard part than you actually do yourself. But now we're moving to a non-deterministic automation, and nobody has a clue. That could mean that being with robots in a non-deterministic world model, whatever you were mentioning, could be dangerous for humans. We already seen that in Amazon, where a robot with bear repellent was open, just kept running while people were falling apart like flies and had to be hospitalized because nobody had actually told the robot had no clue about what was going on in the air. So this is also, that was a moment where we felt that we could control things. And then, of course, it went bust because most of the money went bust, and people decided to to move toward early neural network, whose number one use case, that's why Yann Lequin was known, is to automate the check and signatures and writing in automated payment systems. So the number one use case of a neural network was actually in finance, as you mentioned earlier. And then we moved into a complete unknown thing. But I think these are the last moments where we had a certain, I would say, romantic vision of what AI could be, and that vision got crushed by reality. And then,
Well, to be fair, Elga said in art, correct? Yeah. But even with Flusser himself, I think for me, I would say he kind of moved from symbolic AI, Carnap, over to connectionist in the topography. So it's sort of funny because if you had the famous only two, like a kind of binary of competing schools, even within that, you can see his kind of shift. But I don't know.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, so let's remember tomorrow, just as a reminder, we will have from 10 to noon Central European Time, David W. Bates and Hito Style, and followed by a roundtable from 2 to 4. Let's give a big hand to our presenters today. Thank you, everyone, for joining.